Some sad news out of Hollywood. Oscar and Emmy-nominated actress Diane Ladd has died at the age of 89.
This flesh is growing alive. These bones, this flesh is growing.
What is the price of a Hollywood dream? Is it measured in rejection letters? In sleepless nights? In the quiet sacrifice of a personal life for public acclaim? For actress Diane Ladd, the cost was far higher than anyone could have ever imagined. It was a price paid not in currency, but in trauma, in a grief so profound it could never be spoken aloud, and in a single, stinging moment that her daughter, Laura Dern, would carry as the defining memory of their entire relationship. A slap? This isn't a story about movie stars. This is a story about a mother and a daughter, bound by love, severed by tragedy, and ultimately saved by a desperate, last-chance journey on the sidewalks of Santa Monica. It's a story about the ghost that lived between them for 40 years, and the shocking truth that finally set them free. This is the untold story of the Dern dynasty, a legacy built on brilliance, shattered by loss, and redeemed by the most powerful force in the world, the truth. To understand the complex, beautiful, and often painful bond between Diane Ladd and Laura Dern, you have to go back to the very beginning. Before the Oscar nominations, before the red carpets, before the fame, you have to go back to the Deep South. Diane Ladd was born Rose Diane Ladner in 1932 in Meridian, Mississippi. Her world was one of Southern belles and strict social codes, but Diane was never one to follow the rules. She had a fire in her, a burning need to express herself that the quiet, conservative world of her childhood could not contain. She found her escape in acting. She moved to New York City, a beautiful young woman with a thick Southern accent, in a city that had no patience for it. She faced rejection after rejection. Casting directors told her she'd never work unless she lost the drawl, unless she became someone else. But Diane Ladd was stubborn. She possessed a raw, untamed talent that couldn't be polished away. She worked tirelessly, honing her craft in theater, slowly, painstakingly building a reputation as a serious actress. It was in this world of struggling artists that she met a young, intense, and fiercely talented actor named Bruce Dern. He was different from the other men, wild, unpredictable, and magnetic. Their connection was immediate and volcanic, two brilliant, tempestuous forces colliding. They fell in love in a whirlwind, and their marriage was a passionate, turbulent affair played out against the backdrop of 1960s Hollywood. It was a time of great creative energy, but also of immense personal chaos. Their daughter, Laura, was born into this storm in 1967, and her origin story is so perfectly, poetically Hollywood that if it were in a script, it would be rejected for being on the nose. Laura Dern was conceived on the set of a low-budget, Roger Corman biker film called The Wild Angels, starring her father, Bruce Dern, and her mother, Diane Ladd. Think about the symbolism there. From her very first moment of existence, Laura's life was inextricably linked to the movie business. The sound stages were her playground, the crew her extended family, the language of film her native tongue. It was the only life she had ever known, but that life was fracturing. The marriage between Diane and Bruce was crumbling under the weight of two massive egos, the pressures of fame and Bruce's own well-documented demons. The divorce was ugly, public, and left Diane a single mother in an industry that was notoriously unforgiving to women, especially those who were no longer seen as ingenues. Diane Ladd was now faced with an impossible task, pursuing a demanding, unstable career while raising a daughter completely on her own. The financial pressure was relentless. The fear of not being able to pay the rent was a constant, knowing presence. She later described the agonizing calculus of a single mother in Hollywood: how to put food on the table, how to get her daughter what she needed, and how to present a perfect, unbreakable face to the world for the next audition. "You better not have a rip in that stocking," she recalled. "You better have those shoes not run down. You've got to put on an image." The facade had to be perfect, even if the reality behind it was falling apart. It was from this place of struggle, fear, and hard-won experience that Diane delivered a plea to her young daughter that would become a central, haunting theme of their lives. She looked at Laura, who was already showing a precocious talent for performance, and begged her, "Don't be an actress. Be a doctor. Be a lawyer. Get a real job." This wasn't just casual advice. It was a warning cry from the depths of a mother's soul. Diane Ladd knew the industry's dark side intimately. She knew it was a world that judged women mercilessly on their appearance, that discarded them when they aged, that celebrated them one day and forgot them the next. She knew the psychological toll it took. She wanted to spare her daughter that pain. She wanted to give her a life of stability, of respect, of a real identity that wasn't at the mercy of a fickle, public, and ruthless producers. It was perhaps the most practical and most heartbreaking advice a mother could give. But Laura Dern was her mother's daughter. She had inherited not just Diane's talent, but her iron will. The warning had the opposite effect. The pull of acting was gravitational and irresistible force. The world of make-believe wasn't an escape. It was home. There was no stopping her. As a teenager, she began to pursue roles with a quiet, determined focus that mirrored her mother's own ambition. This set the stage for a unique and often surreal dynamic. They began to work together. Imagine navigating the normal, complex mother-daughter relationship, the arguments, the tensions, the love, and then having to do it in front of a film crew, under the hot lights with a director yelling action. For Laura, it was a bizarre kind of normal. She remembers one particularly telling moment on the set of David Lynch's Wild at Heart. She was in a scene with her mother and her co-star, Nicolas Cage, after a particularly intense take. Cage, known for his own eccentric intensity, crept up behind Laura, stared at Diane Ladd in character, and whispered in awe, "That's your mom, your real mom." The line between their fictional roles and their reality was permanently, fascinatingly blurred. Their professional collaboration reached its glorious peak with the 1991 film Rambling Rose. Laura, in her early 20s, played the title role of a naive, promiscuous young woman who comes to board with a family in the 1930s South. Diane Ladd played the mother of that family, the strong-willed, compassionate matriarch who takes Rose in. The chemistry between them was electric because it was real. They were drawing on a lifetime of shared experience, of unspoken understanding, of love and friction. The performance was a critical sensation. Both mother and daughter were nominated for Academy Awards for their roles in the same film. It was a public triumph, a celebration of their immense, intertwined talent. The world saw a fairy tale story, the legendary mother and the brilliant daughter, supporting each other to the highest pinnacle of their profession. The fairy tale reached its zenith when they received a summons from a princess, the late princess. Diana had seen Rambling Rose and had declared it her absolute favorite film. She personally flew Laura and Diane to London for a royal premiere held in their honor. After the screening, there was a party, and in a moment that still feels dreamlike, Princess Diana sat between the two actresses, holding both of their hands, and told them through tears how moved she was by their performance. The most famous woman in the world was crying because of their art. It was the kind of validation that most artists can only dream of. But behind this glittering, golden facade, the Oscars, the princess, the public adoration, a much darker, more painful reality was playing out. While Diane was building her career, fighting for every role, Laura was often left in the care of her grandmother, Diane's mother. Laura never for a second doubted her mother's fierce, protective love. But the loneliness was a real, palpable force. She missed her mom. She missed the simple, daily presence of a parent. And Diane, in turn, was being eaten alive by guilt that would follow her for decades. Every time she left for a location shoot, it was a fresh wound. She was torn between her calling, the art that gave her life, meaning, and her most important role, being a mother. This is a conflict that resonates with working mothers everywhere. But in the fishbowl of Hollywood, under the constant glare of the public eye, the pressure was magnified 1,000-fold. Yet, all of this, the fame, the struggle, the guilt, was merely the surface level of a much deeper ocean of pain. There was a secret buried so deep in their family history that it was never, ever discussed. A tragedy so profound and so devastating that it became the silent, invisible architecture of their entire relationship. It was the ghost in the room, the wound that never healed. Before Laura was born, Diane Ladd had another daughter, a beautiful, vibrant toddler named Diane Christian Dern. One day, in a horrific freak accident that is every parent's worst nightmare, the little girl was playing near a swimming pool. A nanny's attention lapsed for just a moment. The toddler fell into the pool, hit her head, and was gone. Just like that, the loss was instantaneous and catastrophic. The death of a child is an amputation of the soul. You will never get over that, Diane has said. The pain still raw and vivid in her voice decades later. I don't care what you say to yourself. I don't care who says what. The child is not supposed to die before the parent. The grief was so immense, so all-consuming that it became unspeakable. To give it words was to make it real all over again. So, the family did what so many families do in the face of unbearable pain. They sealed it in a vault of silence. Laura grew up knowing she had a sister who had died. She knew it was a pool accident, but she never, ever asked her mother about it. The subject was a third rail. She saw the shadow that passed over her. Mother's face, if it was ever vaguely referenced. She learned instinctively that to ask about it was to risk shattering her mother completely. So, for 40 years, this immense, unprocessed grief sat between them. It was the reason for Diane's sometimes smothering protectiveness. It was the source of a deep, unnameable sorrow that Laura could feel but not understand. It was the chasm that neither of them knew how to cross. The catalyst for change arrived not as an emotional breakthrough, but as a physical crisis. Diane Ladd, now in her 80s, developed a severe and rare lung disease, believed to be caused by long-ago exposure to toxic pesticides. Her doctors delivered a brutal prognosis. They gave her 6 months to live. The disease was suffocating her slowly and methodically. The only thing that could possibly help, they said, was to walk. The physical act of walking would force her lungs to expand, to fight back against the stiffness and the fluid. It was a Hail Mary pass. So, Laura, desperate to save her mother, did the only thing she could think of. She convinced Diane to start taking daily walks with her along the streets of Santa Monica. At first, it was a grim medical necessity. Diane was weak, breathless, and often resistant. The walks were short, painful, and filled with the heavy silence of impending mortality. But something shifted as the days turned into weeks. The walks became a ritual, a moving confessional. Laura, with a filmmaker's instinct and a daughter's love, began secretly recording their conversations on her phone. Her initial thought was simple: to preserve her mother's voice, her stories, her essence. For her own children, she wanted them to know their grandmother, the force of nature, not just the frail patient. And so, they talked. They talked about everything. The old Hollywood stories, the men they had loved and lost, the struggles and the triumphs. They laughed, they cried, they bickered. The forced intimacy of the walks, the rhythm of putting one foot in front of the other, began to unlock doors that had been sealed shut for a lifetime. And then, one day, surrounded by the mundane sounds of a California neighborhood, Laura found a courage she never knew she had. She gently, carefully broached the unbroachable subject. She asked her mother about the sister she never knew. The silence that followed was heavier than any that had come before. But then, Diane began to speak. The words, held back for decades, came out in a torrent. She talked about her first daughter's laugh, her bright eyes, the horrifying details of the accident, the bottomless grief that followed. She talked about the guilt, the what-ifs, the endless cycle of blame and sorrow. Laura listened, her own tears falling freely. I had not asked, she confessed, because I thought I was going to hurt you. And Diane's response was a revelation. A lesson forged in the fires of their shared pain. If we talk it out, there is healing of all kinds. In that moment, on an ordinary sidewalk, the ghost that had haunted their family was finally exorcised. The unspeakable had been spoken. The dam of silence had broken, and in its place flowed a river of understanding. compassion, and profound healing connection. Laura finally understood the deep, subterranean currents that had shaped her mother's life, her fears, and her love. Diane finally felt the relief of sharing her burden with the daughter who had lived. These recorded walks, these conversations from the brink of death, became the basis for their book, Honey, Baby, Mine. The title comes from an old folk song that Diane's father used to sing to her, a thread connecting them back to a simpler, pre-Hollywood past in Mississippi. The decision to publish these raw, private conversations was an act of incredible bravery. It was an act of generosity and offering to the world. It was their way of saying, this is how we did it. This is how we faced our demons and found each other again. Maybe it can help you, too, and in a twist that feels less like a medical miracle and more like the power of love made manifest. The walks did more than just heal their emotional wounds. They saved Diane Ladd's life. She defied the 6-month death sentence. She kept walking, kept talking, kept fighting. The woman who was given months to live is now 87 years old, and she has just completed another film. Her lungs, against all odds, grew stronger. The story of Diane Ladd and Laura Dern is a masterclass in the complexity of family. It's about the chains of silence that bind us and the transformative power of truth to set us free. It's about the specific, gut-wrenching guilt of the working mother, a guilt that Laura now understands intimately, as she raises her own 2 children in the same demanding industry. She has said that becoming a mother herself was the key that finally allowed her to fully understand her own mother's journey, her sacrifices, and her pain. They started with a slap, a moment of fracture and human imperfection in a world that demanded perfection. But they ended with a lullaby, a promise sung from a mother to a daughter, a melody of unconditional love. You are my sunshine. Their journey teaches us that it is never too late to ask the difficult question. It is never too late to break the silence. Our family histories are not just stories we tell. They are living, breathing forces that shape us. And the greatest inheritance we can ever receive is not fame or fortune, but the courage to finally, fully see and understand the people who made us. So, what is the price of a dream? For Diane Ladd and Laura Dern, the cost was a ghost, a silence that lasted for decades. But the reward, earned through unbearable courage and a walk towards death that became a walk towards life, was something far more valuable than any golden statue. It was truth. It was understanding. It was a love, reforged and stronger than ever, that no tragedy and no amount of time could ever break. Their story is a testament to the idea that our greatest wounds often contain the seeds of our most profound healing, that the very thing we are most afraid to confront, the unspeakable loss, the buried guilt, the lonely memory, is the very thing that, when brought into the light, can finally set us free. The Dern legacy is no longer just a story of Hollywood royalty. It is a story of human resilience, a reminder that behind every famous face is a person who has known loss, who has felt loneliness, who has struggled with the impossible balance of love and ambition. Their journey from a slap to a lullaby is a map for anyone who has ever longed to bridge a distance in their own family. It proves that the most powerful stories aren't always the ones we see on the screen. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live, if we only have the courage to speak them aloud. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think of your own family, your own unspoken histories, then share it. Let's continue this conversation. And remember, the most important script you'll ever write is the story of your own life. Don't be afraid to turn the page.